We are live on YouTube. I'm still getting used to running two cameras at the same time, so apologies that it will lag on the YouTube while I get the Facebook one started. I want to make sure that my video is not in the way. What can you see here? Is that my camera that you can see? Yes, you can, but hopefully that won't impact too much on the screen. If I tip it up slightly, that should be a bit better. Okay, so we're going to go live on Facebook now as well. Okay, team. Hi, it's Nicola from Rossell Fitness, and we are taking a bit of a side avenue today. We're in the middle of our series on kind of dieting and how diets kind of impact weight loss and how they might not be quite as successful as we originally thought they were going to be, and what we can then do to combat that. So as I was doing my research around that topic, I kept coming back to the idea of emotional eating. And I thought that it wasn't in my original plan to include this in the dieting series, but it was a topic that a lot of my members at the moment are talking about, especially with this isolation situation, the lockdown. We're all kind of contained in our houses around all of the food that we perhaps avoid normally. You know, the food is in the house, but if we're not in the house, we're at work, we're not tempted to eat it. So it's kind of a relevant topic right now, so I wanted to include it in this, or as part of this series, or maybe a little sub-series, so that we can start to understand emotional eating a bit better, understand our behaviour a bit better, and be a bit more accountable and responsible for the things that we're putting into our mouths, and really thinking about our long-term health and well-being, physical and emotional and mental well-being, all encompassed into one. So I've made a little kind of how-to series based on this, and this is part one. So the first one is how to kind of recognize emotional eating, with a couple of action points at the end. So I'm going to talk you through that one today, and then we'll move on to the next elements in part two, and maybe a part three if I think that's needed. Okay, so for me, emotional eating is a really personal and kind of relevant topic, because it was the thorn in my side for decades. I'm 30 now, and the first time I remember binge eating or emotional eating or overeating was as early as primary school. I can't exactly pin a year on it, maybe I was 8 or 9, but I remember being at a school fair and seeing, I don't know if you remember back in the day when they had the school fetes, they used to have little plates of cakes, like fairy cakes. So everyone would bring a set of fairy cakes in, and then they'd put one cake onto each plate, and you could buy that plate of varied fairy cakes. And I remember looking at that and thinking, I want to eat all those cakes. So I bought them and I ate all of them. You know, that would have been like, you know, maybe like 6, 7, 8 fairy cakes all in one go. And for a 8 or 9-year-old child, that's a lot of cake to be eating in one go. So I don't remember at the time thinking, why do I want to do this? I don't remember being moderated or told that it was a bad thing. And I don't remember kind of learning any differently. And it just carried on from there, really. And it's, you know, on some occasions, I just wanted to eat certain things in excess. And in other occasions, I just had this craving to eat anything. So sometimes it was a specific craving for like a taste or a texture, or a certain type of food. Other times it was just random, and I just overeat, especially at meal times. So if we look back at our own behavior like this, and if you will know if you're an emotional eater, you will know if you're a binge eater, because it's something that you probably feel quite ashamed of, quite confused by, quite frustrated by, and it's something that will plague you for the rest of your life if you choose not to do anything about it, because this is a learned behavior, it's a reinforced behavior, and it's something that whenever we feel the emotion that is our trigger, we will go into automated mode. We'll go into like automatic behavior mode. You know, you will feel stressed, you will drive to the petrol station and get 4 chocolate bars and eat them all. You know, you feel sad, you'll go to the freezer and you'll get the ice cream out and you'll eat the whole tub. You know, these are just examples of typical behaviours that I've heard about over the years, and things that I've done as well. But obviously, long term, this is not a good strategy in terms of emotional management, in terms of weight management, in terms of health management. So we need to firstly be aware of it and be aware of where it came from. So it's In some cases, it can be a learned behavior in that you learned it from somebody else. So I would say for me, I mine came from two prongs. So I don't remember specifically seeing my parents overeating, which led me to eat those cakes. However, I know that both of my parents, bless their hearts, they both used food and alcohol as an emotional crutch. So as a child, you see what your parents are doing and you mimic them, you copy them because that's what they're there for. Your children are literally becoming little versions of you, and that is your responsibility as a parent to do the best that you can do. And I can look back at my parents' behaviour and I can say, well, they were coping with a lot of stuff. They were coping with health issues and other things, emotional issues. They were dealing the best way they knew how to with what they were feeling. They had obviously learned to use sweets, sugar, chocolates, overeating, binge eating, and drinking alcohol. They'd obviously learned to use those things to moderate their own feelings and to control kind of one element of their lives. So I would say mine came from two areas. I kind of learned it myself, but probably along the way, I picked up on the fact that my parents were doing it, and I thought, oh yeah, well this must be what everyone does. This is normal. This is normal behaviour, and it became a habit for me because I was following my parents' lead and kind of coming at it from my own angle. So I think when it came to the development of this concept, I fueled it with repetition, and that's how you become really good at something. I became really, really good at binge eating because I was doing it all the time. Because every time I felt sad or mad or bad or angry or anything, even sometimes when I felt happy, the whole spectrum of emotions have the ability to trigger us into certain actions, and our actions really do come from these emotions. Okay, so we've got to bear in mind kind of where it came from, but also start to recognize what the triggers are. And in a lot of cases, I think food is often used as a reward, food is used as a comfort, food is used to make children be quiet. And I was never disencouraged from like stuffing my face full of food. And I can recall dinner times where I know that I was probably eating 2 to 3 adult-sized portions in one sitting, and then a dessert on top. And this was praised rather than curtailed. And I was never taught to regulate my appetite. I've always had a really big appetite. I've always liked to eat a lot of food, and that was kind of instilled into me as a child, and it was never moderated by my parents or anyone else around me to tell me to stop. It was not uncommon to see me eat like 3 or 4 croissants or 2 or 3 bowls of cereal. And really, when you've got to moderate your kids' intake, for whatever you think is right for them. But I know looking back at that time that was way, way, way too much for me. And it's fueled the way I am now, because I now have a big appetite that I have to manage as an adult, because I know logically and I know scientifically and biologically I don't need that much food, and I certainly didn't need it back then. Okay, so luckily as a child, my metabolism did most of the work for me. But now coming up to the age of now I'm 30 and going beyond 30, I really need to make sure it's under control, because unfortunately after 30 things do start to slow down, which you may have experienced for yourself. So I know that I'm going to struggle with kind of the connection between my emotions and emotional eating for the rest of my life. I don't think that you ever really stop kind of craving the food and stop kind of having that connection between the emotion and the action, i.e. the overeating or the binge eating or the emotional eating. So what you have to kind of bear in mind is that just because you recognize the pattern, it doesn't mean the pattern is going to stop. But that doesn't mean that it won't stop either. I'm just telling you that you've got to be prepared to still have the feelings even when you've recognized it and owned up to it. Okay, so just to define emotional eating, I would define it as eating for any reason other than true hunger. So you can recognize true hunger because this can be satisfied by any food at all. So you could eat, if you were really truly hungry, and you could satisfy that with broccoli or Brussels sprouts. But when you are emotional, when you're kind of craving that emotional food, you never crave broccoli and you never crave Brussels sprouts. So true hunger can be satisfied by any food at all. And it doesn't tend to come along with any particular types of cravings or food kind of preferences. Obviously, you will have preferences in terms of what you like, but true hunger can be satisfied by any foodstuff. Whereas emotional hunger usually means that you're craving certain foods or certain tastes or certain textures, and it generally cannot be satiated by anything other than those specific things, because you're kind of tied up in the moment and with the kind of almost like obsessive sense of what you want to have at that time. So true hunger will also come on gradually, and it can be delayed in that you can wait to be satisfied. So if you're truly hungry, and if your appetite is kind of moderated and a fair and decent level, you will be able to wait half an hour or an hour for your food to cook. Yes, you'll have that grumbly tummy. Yes, you'll know that you are hungry, but you won't have that desperation to put food into your face. Whereas emotional hunger tends to feel really compelling. It tends to be really powerful and strong, and it usually comes on really quickly, probably in response to a situation or something that has happened in your life. So it's you've got to kind of recognize the difference between these two things so that you can recognize when your appetite is intense and strong, but it's not emotional. Whereas, recognizing when it's emotional so that you can start to pick up on your triggers is a really important thing to do. So true hunger tends to only last for as long as it takes to, eat your food slowly and satiate the needs of your body, whereas emotional hunger is often prolonged and extended, to the point where you won't be satisfied until the food that you intended to eat is gone. So back when I was binge eating, particularly in the kind of the worst days, when that this was more like when I was kind of early 20s, just out of uni, feeling very unsure about what I wanted to do, feeling very kind of low in confidence, and just in general being like just lost and feeling alone and like no one could get me. I know back then that I'd go to the petrol station. There was a petrol station like 2 minutes from my house, so I'd find myself almost in like a dream or a trance-like state. Treading the path to the petrol station, picking out maybe 2 flapjacks, 2 big bags of chocolates, 2 or 3 chocolate bars, maybe a pack of those little Eccles cakes, and eating all of it. Okay, and that wouldn't have even been the worst of my binges. So just to give you a sense of what I used to do, I used to be ashamed of that. I used to be scared to tell people that I did that. I used to think like, how is anyone ever going to take me seriously as a personal trainer if I can't even control what goes into my mouth? Because at the time, it didn't feel like it was in my control. It felt like a complete compulsion. It felt like I was just literally, like a switch had been flipped, in terms of I was being turned on. I went, walked to the shop, bought the food, ate the food. It felt like an automatic process. And that is because I practiced it to the point where it was automatic. Like any skill that you ever learn, if you're learning to juggle, if you're learning to do a squat, if you're like anything you try and learn a language, a musical instrument, the more you practice, the more you reinforce those basic movements, the more efficient and more automatic they get. Like, for example, when I was learning the guitar, when I first started to learn, I couldn't even bend my fingers into the shapes that my teacher wanted me to do. Now I can play a range of songs. Not that I'm particularly good, but I can do it. I know how to move from a C to an A to a D to a G to whatever chord I need to do, and go up and down the neck of the guitar. I can do a little bit of twiddling down on the other hand down here. So it's a case of recognizing that when you practice and reinforce behavior, it is going to get more powerful, it is going to get more automatic, and it is going to feel more natural and easy to do it as just without even really thinking about it. And that's where the problem comes in, is that if we don't allow ourselves to think, to stop and think, then we are just going to keep going and keep repeating these behaviors, and then obviously we potentially go into these guilt and shame spirals after. So just bear in mind that emotions can range from happiness to sadness, anger, relief, anything and everything in between those things. So if you are eating for any other reason than a physical need to eat, then you've got to bear in mind that you might be an emotional eater. And the important thing right now to understand is that you can get this under control, okay? I did this mostly on my own, because back then I was too afraid, too ashamed to tell anyone, and it took me probably, nearing on a decade to get this under control. I don't know if I share this with everybody, but this was the first Easter. So we've just gone past Easter now. It's April the 17th. We've just gone past Easter. This was genuinely the first Easter in my living memory where I didn't binge eat my Easter eggs. In the past, I've asked family and friends, like, please don't buy me, Easter eggs or Christmas chocolate or birthday chocolate. Please don't buy it for me, because I can't control myself. And this year, I said to my partner, if you want to buy me an Easter egg, and I am going to control myself this year. I'm not going to binge eat. I'm going to enjoy my Easter egg. I'm going to factor it into my life. And that was a massive, massive, massive win for me. And anyone that's not been a binge eater before, anyone that's not had an issue with emotional eating, will not understand. There are some people in this world who can plan their meals out, they eat until they feel full, and they put the rest away in the fridge or in the bin or whatever. They don't feel compelled to clear their plate. They don't feel compelled to finish the packet. They don't feel compelled to eat until they feel sick. There are people out there that are like that, and that's amazing. I wish that I had that ability, and I'm still working toward that as an individual now. But I'm not like that. Okay, that is not who I am. It's not how I've learned how to be. So I have to kind of moderate that and manage that every day. So something like not binge eating my Easter eggs is a really big win for me, and that's something that I'm going to take credit for, because if I don't, then it's very easy to slip back down the slippery slope back into being a binge eater and into that guilt and shame spiral. So there are studies being done about things like willpower, and what seems to be kind of emerging is that willpower is not this kind of infinite resource that we can just rely on. We run out of it, and we run out of it damn quickly. So willpower for me tends to be a mixture of the amount of energy that we have and how strong our motivation is on any given day. So when we run out of willpower, which we kind of use willpower as this blame game, I didn't have the willpower, so I gave in. When we run out of willpower and kind of follow our automated behaviors, we are simply just reinforcing and repeating those certain coping mechanisms, coping behaviors, which just strengthen and make the emotional eating connection more powerful. So this is not an excuse for overeating. We still need to be responsible for our choices. We still need to take responsibility and be accountable. This behavior may feel automatic, but it isn't. It isn't a foregone conclusion. Okay, you still have a choice. You can still choose not to. It will just be, in the beginning, it will be a harder thing to do. So when you're trying to firstly identify if this applies to you, then secondly do something about it, you've got to bear in mind that those first few times that you tell yourself that you're not going to do it, you might not be successful. Okay, you might not be able to stop yourself. But just the fact that you are trying means that you are getting closer to that point where you can nip it in the bud. Okay. So all it really takes is saying no to yourself and creating a distraction to make sure that you do something else instead of going to the pantry or the fridge or wherever it is that you keep your kind of naughty treats that you use for your emotional eating. And if you don't keep them in the house, then make sure that if you go out for a walk, that you don't walk past the shop that you normally go to pick up your treats. Okay, so it's this first video, this first resource today is just about recognition and a bit of background on emotional eating. So we need to know what we're up against. So I want you to ask yourself the following questions and just be totally honest. Who else is listening right now in terms of you to yourself? You're just being honest with yourself about who you are, what you do, the choices that you make. So firstly, do you eat in secret? So these are all questions designed to kind of make you think about the occasions that you eat and the choices that you make and the feelings that you have around food. So do you eat in secret? Do you feel more comfortable when eating alone? Do you eat when you feel stressed? Do you eat when you are full or not hungry? Do you use food to make yourself feel better? Do you treat yourself with food? And do you see food as a comfort or a stress relief or a reward? And when we can recognize some of these behaviors, we can start to pick these apart and understand what is happening to you on a personal level, what emotions are driving that behavior, and essentially what is the kind of starting point, the trigger, so that we can then work down the line or even work in reverse to understand the behavior and try and stop the behavior in its tracks before you reinforce it over and over and over again. Okay, so a couple of bits to think about. Step one, really, if you're looking to tackle this right now today, pause for thought. If you can get yourself to pause before you dig out the ice cream or grab the cookies, then you can stop the action in its tracks. The biggest problem with emotional eating is when it's mindless. Generally, when I was doing it, it was never mindless. It was more that I switched off the part of my mind that was telling me no. I would have these conversations with myself as I was walking to the shop, and I'd be going, you could just turn around right now. You could just turn around and walk home and not binge eat today. And I would just completely override that part of my brain. On some level, I think I wanted to punish myself. I wanted to kind of berate myself. I wanted to have a reason to be a failure. It sounds very strange, but when you get to know yourself a bit better, when you understand how you tick inside and what kind of, what the kind of levels of self-belief and self-confidence are for you, you will start to understand these self-sabotaging behaviors. So when you put an action into action, it's really hard to stop that chain reaction from happening, but it's not impossible. So it just requires you to consciously think about an alternative. Sometimes, like I just explained for me, you can't talk yourself out of it. And, in those times, try to just not be too hard on yourself. Try and be a bit compassionate towards yourself and recognize that you're doing your best and that it's a learned and reinforced behavior that will feel very powerful in your mind. Okay, step two is to pay attention. So own up to how you are feeling and write it down. A journal or just a bit of paper. Start to track the incidents of emotional eating. So even if you're still giving into your triggers, for now, let's just work on identifying what they are. So we can work on the why, and then we can start to understand how to change in days and weeks to come. Okay, so be kind to yourself. Let's start to recognize if you have an issue with emotional eating. Please, 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 it's nothing to be ashamed of. Okay, I was ashamed for such a long time, and it kept me stuck. It kept me stuck in that rut. It kept me stuck in that binge, guilt, shame cycle. Okay, and it didn't help me to overcome it. So I just prolonged the mess that I got myself into. So try to recognize it. Try to be honest and introspective with yourself. You don't have to tell anyone else just yet. If you want to share it with me, please do. But if you want to keep it to yourself, that's absolutely fine. So firstly, recognize if you think you have an issue. Secondly, if you can, start to write down the triggers that are leading you to those binge or emotional eating situations. So if you can start to identify the patterns and the things like, oh, I felt angry and then I ate, I felt sad and then I ate, or whatever it is for you, start to try and identify the trigger, the thing that happened and what that led you to. So you can start to understand what your trigger situations are, your trigger emotions, and the foods that you go for. And sometimes it's useful not to maybe have those foods in the house if you know that they're the things that you tend to binge or overeat on. Okay, so that is more or less all I wanted to talk about today. So there is a PDF to go along with this video. So I will link that up in the comments when I've done all the kind of bits of editing that I need to do. Please, if you have any questions, either post them in the comments. I realise that it's quite a personal and private topic for a lot of people. So if you don't feel comfortable posting publicly, then just contact me separately. What you need to bear in mind is that I'm not an eating disorder specialist. Binge eating is an eating disorder. If you feel that you are kind of at a point where you want to ask for help, but you think you need a higher level of help than I'm able to give you, and I can help you decide that for yourself. I can obviously give you a background, a personal account, and I can give you some tactics and things that you can try. But if you think you have a true eating disorder, I would seriously encourage you to seek out an eating disorder specialist. Or at the very least talk to your GP or a counsellor, just so you can get the ball rolling. Okay, but if your first port of call is me, I can then signpost you toward other people that I trust in my industry to guide you through this. Okay, so that is the introduction to emotional eating and the kind of intro into how to start managing it and recognizing it. We're going to move on next week into a bit more detail into a few more strategies. So again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for allowing me to share this with you. Thank you for kind of not judging me, and I won't judge you if you want to share with me. It's going to be a very kind of no judgment here. Okay, it's this is something that you have learned over the years as a coping mechanism. There's nothing wrong with finding a way to cope with emotional situations. We may just have to redirect the action that you are taking so that we can have health and well-being at the forefront of everything that we try to do. Okay, thank you so much for your time, and I will catch you on the next one very soon. Bye.